Hello guys, this is video number 2 of this Introduction to Programming video series. In this video, we are going to talk about what is OOP, what are data types involved, what are the needed tools you're going to need if you want to write some code. So let's start. What is OOP? OOP is the short term of object-oriented programming, which means that a programming language is based on objects. Whatever you want to do, you have to create an object. What is an object? I will show you what is called a UML diagram of representing objects. So, an object is a mapping between real world things or objects into a programming language object. For example, in a real world scenario, we could have a person. This person could have a name, could have a phone number, could have an email address. Here we can ignore this right now, but what we care about now is the name, the phone number, the email address. Those are called properties, sometimes attributes. Also, you can call them characteristics of this person object. That's all. That's all, guys. It's only mapping between something that lives in the real world. We just take it, bring it in our code, and we write in a UML diagram. That's this one here. We write it like this. This rectangular here represents what is called a class. This class name is person. This person has name, phone number, email address as attributes. These attributes will have what is called a getter and what is called also a setter. A getter is used to get the value of this property or attribute. A setter, we use it to set the value of this attribute. So for example, you have a person, this person should have a name. You need a way to give this name a value. And you need also a way to get this value back. That's why we call them getters and setters. Here we have an address object. We can see that this address object contains street, city, state, postal code, and country. These are the attributes or properties of this address object. Every time you create an object of type address, you can give these properties values, and they will um, they will give this address something unique that only this address will have these properties. We also have a student. Student has a student number, an average mark. A professor always has a salary. You can ignore these arrows now, but we will come and explain these arrows in future videos. But what I want you to focus on right now is the simplicity of this object term. It's nothing but something. You have, if you want to represent something in your code, you make an object. And the way we make objects in our code is by using classes. Every object that you see here is going to be called a class. You create a class. This class name is address, and this class has properties. These are the properties. Or it's a person with these properties, a student, a professor. These are all classes. We're going to see this in code later. For now, let's stick to what we know. Next, we're going to look at data types because before I introduce classes and objects, properties will have types. And if you don't know the data types, how are you going to give your properties types? So they are very easy. You can just learn them very fast. They are not complicated. It depends on what kind of property you have. For example, we have primitive types, we have non-primitive types, or we call them objects. We will see the objects later. Primitive types are like integer. Integer is the real numbers. Real numbers like 1, 2, 0, 4, they don't have decimal point numbers. Float, as you can see, I have here written an example for each type. Float is when you have a decimal point. double also when you have a decimal point. Decimal is also a decimal point number. The difference between these three is decimal has more range than double, double has more range than float. Decimal is mainly used in C# to represent money because it's claimed that it's very, very accurate to represent money. So we stick to it to represent money. Char is the data type for one character. There is also string, but string is not a primitive type. String is an object because a string contains so many characters, so many chars. Mainly, we used to create string as an array of characters, so a string is an object. Later on, you will understand the main difference between the primitive types and the objects. They also differ in how they get stored in memory and how the computer retrieves these values. And we also have objects. Objects are classes and records. Classes are the main working unit here. So we create a person class, a car class, a book class, and when you create an instance of one of these classes, you are creating an object. A record is a class. The difference between records and classes is when you create a record, you can't change this record. That's all. This is the main difference. So a record is a class, but the difference is, again, when you create a record, you can't change it later. You have to create another record in order to change some values. When I say values, I mean the properties of these records, like the properties of these classes. So with this out of the way, let's move on to the needed tools that you are going to need if you want to write some code, specifically in C#. First of all, we are going to need .NET 8 SDK LTS. LTS stands for long-term support. It means that why do we go and install .NET 8 LTS? Because LTS, you don't get another version until 3 years. That's why it is called long-term support. So you can rest assured that you don't have to play with your SDKs until 3 years. And even if you don't like the addition, the updates in the new SDK, you might not update it as well. This is very important. You won't be able to write code if you don't have the .NET 8 SDK. And it's very simple to download and install. I'm going to show you how to download it. Next, we are going to need an IDE to write our code in. Actually, normally, an IDE is a normal text editor, but with some additional powers like IntelliSense, like it helps you rewrite code. It generates code for us. It looks good. It looks, I mean, at least better than Notepad. So we have Microsoft Visual Studio. The Community Edition is free. And this is what I prefer because it helps us a lot in writing code. It generates a lot of code. You don't have to write everything from scratch. In Microsoft VS Code is also a very powerful tool. The main difference is you have to do everything by yourself. It doesn't generate code. It helps you a little bit with IntelliSense, but is not as powerful as Microsoft Visual Studio when it comes to C#. But if you are writing Python, maybe, if you are writing Erlang, Elixir, VS Code is the #1 IDE for these type of languages. But for Visual Studio Community Edition, it's the most powerful for C#. Now I'm going to show you how you can download both of these. All you have to do is you can go to your web browser and write .NET Microsoft download. You will get this site. As you can see, we have .NET 8 download .NET SDK, and this is long-term supported. This is for .NET. We need now is an IDE. We can go and say Microsoft Visual Studio download. and we can go to the page. As you can see, we have community, professional, enterprise. We need the community edition, and also you can see here Visual Studio Code, which is the VS Code that I was talking about. It's good to have it, but we're not going to use it doing C# code. We're going to be using a community edition. You will see why. All you have to do is click on this, install it, and that's it. In order for you to be sure or to know that you have successfully installed .NET, all you have to do is open your terminal and write .NET -- list SDKs, and you will get to see the version you have installed. If nothing appears here, it means you haven't installed .NET correctly. Okay. And also one note, if you install .NET 8 and your terminal is open, you're not going to see any results. You won't be able to write .NET until you close your terminal and relaunch it again, because this .NET gets written in the environment variable, in the path environment variable, and this path the terminal needs to be relaunched, restarted in order for it to read the path environment variable again. That's all. So let's start. Now I'm going to show you guys how do we create a project in Microsoft Visual Studio. This is what you get when you first launch Microsoft Visual Studio. We simply click on Create Project. Here you might not have anything here, because here you only see your recent project templates. What we are going to do is search for console, and we get a console app. As you can see, is a project for creating a command line application, which means everything that you do is going to is the result you're going to see in a terminal, in a command line application that can run on .NET, on Windows, Linux, and Macs. Because .NET is a cross-platform now, you can write your code on any of these operating systems. So it's very good. Let's start. The project name, we call it whatever we want. We can say first project. We can come to the solution and do app. A solution is nothing but a grouping of multiple projects. You can have multiple projects in one solution. So it's an organizing thingy. It's not that big deal. You can have a project without a solution, no problem. But when you start a project from Microsoft Visual Studio, you are going to get a solution. Your project is going to be grouped in a solution. And we can also edit the path where we are going to save our project. You can click on browse, select the folder you would like to. If you already have a path, used a path before, you might find it here like I do. All you have to do is choose it. Now it's going to be saved in this path. We click next. We make sure we have .NET 8 long-term support, and we ignore this for now, and we click create. Every time you create a project, you will be introduced to this program.cs file. This program.cs file is called the entry point of our project. What does an entry point mean? It means that your program is going to run from here. No matter how many files you add here, they are not going to be run unless you reference these files here, these classes here, because this is your entry point. Yeah, that's it. And one thing also to mention, this is a new way of entry points. Usually what we used to have is we used to have something called class, program, and in this class we used to have a public void main. As you can see, IntelliSense figured this out automatically. And here, all your code is going to live inside here. Now, if I run my program, nothing is different. Now, everything is is cool. Program is going to run. As you can see, I'm going to do this. Read. Now this is how it used to be, but not anymore. Now all you have to do is this out of this class, and you don't see the class and the main method again. So now if I run this program, it's going to run and it's gonna show hello world. Okay. I told you about data types. So let's start with, let me show you these data types in action. We have, for example, integer x. You can see x can take 0 until infinity, but no infinity. There is range for integer, of course, but it's not gonna accept, for example, x 1.4. This is wrong because integer is only for real numbers. We also have float. Float y equals 2.5, but if you don't write, we have to write f as a suffix. If you don't write this f, the C# compiler, whenever it sees a decimal number, it thinks it's a double, because this is the default type for decimal numbers in C#. So if you want a float, you have to write f. But if you come and write double, z equals 2.56, for example, everything is okay, because this is the default type for decimal numbers. There is also the decimal. You can write decimal O equals, for example, 3.78. Here also you have to write the letter M to tell the compiler that I know what I'm doing and I want a decimal. The same as here. We know what we are doing and we want a float. Okay. We also have the char word. Let's call it letter equals A. This is one letter. You can't do AB. This is wrong. Because as you guys know, every letter is a 1 byte in size. And when you say a character, it means I want to save 1 byte in this variable. And this only fits for 1 byte. And if you write 2 characters, it means you have 16 bits, or so 2 bytes. This is not going to fit. That's why it gives you an error. We also have the string. Let's say name equals hello. You can see we can put as many as we want from characters here, because this is not a primitive type. This is an object. So very careful when dealing with strings. So many guys think that a string is a primitive type, but it is not. Why is this important? We are going to see this later. Why it is important to know that this is an object and not a primitive type. What's the difference? Why should we be careful? We're going to see that later. Okay. Now we have seen the primitive types. We have seen the string, not a primitive type, but an object. Object. Let me now show you guys how do we create objects in code. All we have to do, we go to our project, right click, and we go to add a class. We add a class, we call it person, and we click on add. It's internal. I will going to explain for you guys later what does internal means. Actually, mainly we have internal, we have public, we also have private, we have protected, we have partial. All these, we'll talk about this later, don't worry. But let's make this public for now. Okay, now we have defined an object, defined a class. And this class, when we want an object of type person, we can say we need a person. We can come here and say person, person is new person. Now we have an object which is this person. But this object for now doesn't have any attributes, that doesn't have any properties. So we are going to create some properties. We can in C# you can do it. You can write prop and tab and you will get this automatically. Integer, ID, and now we have a property called ID. What else? We can do public string name. We can follow the IntelliSense by hitting tab and you will get this automatically, or you can use the prop again and type string tab and you can write name. Now we have a person. This person has two properties, the ID and the name. Save, we can come here and say, now look how do we access these properties. We say that we write the name of the object dot and you will start getting the properties that you have defined in the class object. We start by ID is, let's say it's 1, and now we have the person dot name equals, let's say, Sam. Now if we want to print this object, we can do person dot ID plus person dot name. Now if we run this program, we're going to see ID and name 1 Sam. We want to make this a little bit uh, more beautiful. We can do this. Now we can have a space between the ID and the name of this person. Okay, this is how we create objects. We define a class, we give this class a name, we give this class an identifier, which defines what is the scope of this class. Is it internal? Is it public? Is it protected? And in our program, we can start making, we call this instantiating. We call this also making instances of this class. Also corresponds to creating objects. Now we have an object of type person. Okay, one keyword I would like to tell you about, as you can see here, is we have integer, float, double decimal character, string, and we also have person. There is also what is called var in C#. This word, this keyword means that we are telling the compiler, you go and try to guess what type of variable I have. For example, variable person2 equals new person. Now, if we hover over var, we can see it says it's of type person. The compiler figured this out alone by itself. Also, if I say var t equals 5, you will see that var is now integer because also the compiler figured this out. If I say var letter 2 equals q, now if we go to var, we will see it's a char. As you can see here, it's a char, the same thing we wrote here. So we can use the var, but whenever you want to use the var word, keyword, you have to assign a value to the variable. Otherwise, the compiler won't be able to figure out what type is this variable. For example, if I say var r and now end it, this is not going to work because the compiler doesn't know what type of variable is r is. So you have to do some assignment. And for example, we have 5.6, which is a double. What I told you about double, I told you it's the default decimal type in C#. So if you don't write F, if you don't write M, it's gonna be taken as double automatically. And here is double. Now, if I add F, it's going to be float. He recognizes, yeah, floating number is single floating number. So if I write, it means if I write 2, What is it now? Also floating number. But if I delete the F and write M, it's going to be decimal, as you can see. If I take it out, it's going to get back to double. This is what the var word does. It lets the compiler figure out type by itself. This is not new. This is new in C Sharp, but this is not new in the programming world. Basically, I think it's taken from JavaScript, because in JavaScript you don't say integer or string. No, all you have to do is you're writing var. You write var, you give a value to your variable, and that's it. You are responsible for dealing with your variable. Yep, and that for today, I think that's enough. In next video, I'm going to talk about I'm going to talk about these identifiers, public, private, internal, this stuff. I'm going to show you what do they mean. Also, I'm going to talk about memory. What's the difference between primitive types and object types? What's the big deal about differentiating between them? So I hope you like this video, and I hope to see you in my next video.